Live from Denmark. On behalf of the whole SCIF meetings and Bizzabo teams, I'd like to welcome you to this webinar. As we get settled in, and some of you have started doing this already, please enter the chat where you're joining us from, and maybe even a greeting, your own original greeting, so we can all feel a little bit more connected. This is the SCIF meetings webinar in partnership with Bizzabo, event data intelligence, turning ideas and insights into action. This webinar has been created as real-time advice, so ask questions and also upvote questions from others so we know which questions you really want to have answered. A little bit of housekeeping now. Please submit your questions through the Ask the Speaker channel on the right hand of your screen. Weigh in on the content through the session chat. You may be able to reply and react to the messages too of other people. You want to show the speaker some love? There is a emoji reaction button at the bottom center of your screen. So play with that. We'd love to have some emoji reactions from you. And yes, the presentation will be recorded and shared with all registrants by tomorrow. So joining me are two event tech thought leaders with lots of experience in event data. We have Devin Cleary, VP of Global Events at Bizzabo, and Rachel Heller, Senior Event Content Manager at Bizzabo. They'll be sharing actionable advice on how to really use and benefit from event data, and even sharing some applications of event data that you may never have considered before. Devin, Rachel, welcome. Shall we get started?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's jump in. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you, Miguel.
Excellent. Great to have you both. Looking forward to this conversation. So let's jump in. Data is this big topic. Everybody talks about it. Everybody talks about how to make the best use of it. But I know you're going to share some real kind of actionable insights. So let's talk about, where we are right now. World record-setting inflation, fears of recession. Many event marketers are facing added pressure to prove ROI of their events. But let's say an event planner comes back to a CFO and says, hey, we spent $10,000 on this event, round number, but we only made $5,000 in sales. Is there a way to use data to explain the value of the event that goes beyond this direct sale?
Yeah, I'll get started with this question. It's a great question to start this conversation with because it's something I'm sure we all can relate to, having been in those stressful meetings with our leadership teams and our finance teams. But before we jump into answering the ROI question specifically, when you're faced with that question in particular, you need to rewind a little bit and make sure that you've set expectations with your executive teams, with your finance teams on the clear goals and objectives for your event. Make sure they're documented and make sure they're more than just around net new sales. That should not be the only focus of your event. So going back to those numbers you said, your $10,000 budget and your $5,000 sales number, it's relevant to think about when that $5,000 number is being reported. So at Bizzabo, we think about the long-term impact of your event. We've created a measurement model where we look at data and activity 6 different points following your event. So the first number there, we have a slide that's about to jump up that I just wanted to speak to so folks can reference it. So when you think about sales activity following your event, we look at 72 hours following your event and 2 weeks following your event. And it's important to actually set meetings with those folks and real checkpoints saying, we gave you all these great leads, all this great information around how they participated in our event. Have you been following up? If not, how can we help you do that? Or if you are, and how has that process been? Then when we're thinking about business impact, we actually look at it 4 different times: 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, and 180 days following your event. We're looking at pipeline, we're looking at leads, when those marketing qualified leads have become now sales accepted leads. One thing I want to point out actually about those 4 different points is we traditionally always looked at our events 30, 60, 90 days out. I just added 180 days to this slide this morning. I'm fresh off of attending SEMA Summit, and we met with a few top event executives from some of the largest enterprises in the country, and they're looking at it as far as 180 days out. So I wanted to make sure this group joining us today had that real-time data. So those were kind of how we just think about when we're measuring those numbers, but I wanted to hand it over to Devin to give some examples of the data points themselves that we're looking at.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think in answering this question in the context of when we're sort of briefing executives like a CFO, the number one thing that I want to validate for everyone on this webinar today is that the most important metric they care about is pipeline. So when we think about sort of event metrics, like again, reporting on registration or maybe even an NPS score, those are still key indicators, but the metric that CXOs care about the most is that pipeline number, or sort of what we were able to sort of close or win after the event. Some advice that I would want to sort of share though overall, and sort of maybe even a data point to provide to all of you today, is we actually administered a LinkedIn poll prior to this webinar, and we were able to engage with a handful of CXOs and high-level event marketers and thought leaders really around what is that most important metric. And no surprise, 41% of those executives had said MQLs and sales qualified leads were really the predominant really sort of measurement tool or sort of signal or data point that they're looking at to really justify the investments that they're providing to marketing and to the events organization to really, again, spend wisely. And they're really using that as a signal of what's working and what needs modification or changes. Now, when we think about the CFO, and again, I'm not trying to pull away from the question, I think it's really important that I also share with you, I've been in these situations. I have had the privilege of supporting some of the top CMOs in the world, and as well as, again, sort of the extended leadership team. One thing I want to share with all of you as sort of some advice is making sure that we get in front of those conversations before those questions are asked. So one thing I would advise everyone to sort of create is really think about how do we develop a comprehensive plan around proving the ROI of an event. And even though pipeline might be the most important, it's really critical that we signal other benefits and sort of influences that events can drive around the portfolio. So we can think of things like customer ARR. How many customers were present at the event depending on the format and the style? And that ARR holds a significant retention goal tied to the business, which is ultimately connected to revenue. Are we talking to our CFO about that? Are we educating them on all these different metrics and sort of numbers that really have to sort of be important? Another thing we talk about with event goals with leadership is educating them on the sort of catalyzation of developing community. We all want to turn our events into community-driven sort of mechanisms. And one way to do that is how many net new contacts are we adding into our databases that are, again, opportunities for them to connect with our existing customers and our future customers. Also looking at the number of meetings that we're hosting or facilitating or a direct result of hosting event content or a program. We look at the number of demo requests that we can source. So I really want to share all of those data points to say, I implore you to consider educating the leadership team and all those different variables that can really piece together a very comprehensive story when it comes to that data. And again, helping to really focus on maybe even a new trend. When Rachel's talking about some of the things we learned at SEMA, another really big discussion point was around net new pipeline creation tied to an event, which is again what correlates to this question, and also versus engaging and accelerating existing pipeline. And a lot of event leaders, especially at enterprise and B2B brands, they're now focusing their events in alignment with their exec staff on that engagement and acceleration of pipeline, which obviously with customers and expansion deals, it really runs the gamut. So there's so many different ways to slice this. But when a CFO, for example, is asking a very direct question, that signals to me there needs to be some education and some consistent communication that is coming from the event leaders and the events team as a whole to really give them a good foundation of how we can piece the story together and frankly justify all the impact and the investment we're receiving.
Thanks for that. I think that's a very complete answer already. I sense a kind of theme here, which is really, okay, maybe you didn't make the sale, maybe the direct sale return wasn't there, but there's a lot of other return that through event data we might be able to tackle and measure. So I think one of the ones we're kind of talking about here is engagement metrics and kind of this idea that you can measure buyer intent. Rachel, could you elaborate on how we may be able to do that?
Yeah, I think there are two key points in which you can set your event up in a way to understand buyer intent. Since I focus on content, one lens in which I think about it obviously is content. And when you're thinking about your sessions and those topics, actually mapping them to the different stages of your buyer journey. So content, from the perspective of a company who sells software, if you have sessions that are customer case studies or peer case studies or very, clear product demos, or sessions where you have your product experts just doing a, AMA, Ask Me Anything, those sessions are very bottom of the funnel type content. And for people who attend them, that's a sign that tells you, hey, this person is really interested in learning more about our software, and then can elevate them into a higher in the queue for your sales team. Another way you can look at this, if maybe content isn't your focus, is during the registration process. So you can ask questions, qualifying questions that understand based on how someone might use your product when they might be ready to buy it. So an example from Bizzabo's perspective is a question that we've asked during our events is, do you have an event in the next 6 months? Someone who does and who attends a session that is very bottom of the funnel focused is, again, someone you'd elevate in the queue for your sales team. So thinking about, what your event is trying to do and some of those questions that you might be able to ask to understand your buyer intent. I want to hand it over to Devin to just make this actionable for you and to give a clear example of, how we might have used this for some of our events.
Yeah, I'm happy to. And I think, one thing that's been really exciting is over the last 2 years when we've seen such innovation come to market and the amount of engagement tools and sort of tactics and strategies that we've been able to sort of test, with our audiences, it's really helped us understand how to really capture very behavioral based data that we can tie back to intention. So I'm going to give you a very specific example. There was a goal of ours at Bizzabo to really help with customer retention and product adoption. So we developed 2 quarters ago a new series, which we call our Event Tech Showcase. And what we're really doing is partnering with a cross-functional group, and we're really creating very bottom of the funnel content where we're rolling out to market kind of the latest product features, the latest kind of roadmaps, making sure that customers have the latest education and knowledge to be able to utilize our tools and our platforms to the utmost of their ability. Now, how do we really translate, a registration, an attendee, and so on and so forth to really empower and mobilize our sales teams and our customer organizations to really use that data to further, again, develop those relationships and seed those relationships so significantly that it results in, again, retention, in lower churn, and so on and so forth. So these are really 4 data points that we looked at with this event that I'll share with each of you today. The first is maybe a more obvious one, which is we really look at how long someone stays and engages with the content. There is a new metric that we discuss in our industry, which we title the acronym ROA, which stands for Return on Attention. Is someone watching 45%, 75%, and consuming that level of content for a single session? That tells us, and we can map that to exactly where the content ended when they dropped to know how much knowledge and how much information we were able to pass along. So it really helps us in that buyer journey know exactly what type of follow-up message they should receive, or what additional clips or tutorials, videos, blog posts that can help to, again, connect the dots and really close the full circle of what we were intending them to learn during that session. The next is going to be attendee or sort of registrant to attendee conversion. So we know kind of right now we're seeing sort of a 40% conversion benchmark for virtual. We're seeing anywhere between kind of a 85 to 92% conversion for in-person based on some net new metrics we're seeing come to market with our customers. And that's really important because, one thing I would share is when someone attended, they've really given you the signal that they have more intent and more interest in really learning that topic and that conversation. Like many of you today saying, I showed up because this is a very passionate topic and I want to really learn something to walk away and really level up as an event experience leader. But it's so critical in your post follow-up messages that you really signal to them and let them understand that that they actually attended. Because treating them like a human versus just another number or another attendee, that's exactly the goal around humanizing events that we're all trying to achieve every single day. Now, the third metric is really looking at the chat activity. How active were they in these chats? All of you are participating right now, and you're sharing and responding and commenting on certain things, or you're sharing where you're located. We really want to look at the number of times that a single attendee is engaging in those chats, what they're saying, how they're saying it, if they're responding to something, if they're asking questions, and we can really start to add those activity points up and really signal a different scoring methodology around lead pass. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. And then also, how engaged are they with the initial post-event follow-up? So do they click on the button to learn more? Do they access that next piece of content? Do they RSVP to that next event you're going to invite them to? That really speaks volumes on exactly how warm or how cold these potential individuals are and how ready they are to engage in a further conversation with your community and with your sort of sales force. So the other thing we try to do at Bizzabo, and again, we're trying to iterate on this every single day. No one is perfect, and we're trying to really make sure that we can just always level up with every subsequent event we have in our portfolio. We're really trying to summarize all of those activity and behaviors and really create report cards on different attendees and different accounts. So if you think about that, you can really pass along the most engaged individuals. So your sales team is following up almost immediately on the warmest leads you have that have really given you all of these signals based on their activity. And that way, they're not frankly wasting time on calling someone who might be in the awareness stage and really needs a lot more education and handholding to convert them to the next phase of the buyer's journey.
Great stuff, Devin. I think there's a lot of information to unpack there, so we'll probably have to cover that and go a little bit deeper. Just want to remind everybody that we'd really welcome your questions. If you're in the join the conversation kind of channel, you might want to click on the all channels tab just above the little all channels, and then go to ask the speaker. Drop your questions in there. We'd love to get questions from you and answer specific questions. Also, if there's any acronyms we're using, anything at all that you're not sure of, don't be shy. Just ask, and we will do our best to clarify those. So I want to jump into some concrete examples. There's a lot of theory there, a lot of good ideas, but let's talk about how you actually put that into practice to really create that more personalized attendee experience.
Sure. I have a great example that I'm happy to jump in with. So recently we hosted another event earlier in the spring, and it was our Event Experience Summit, and it was really important for us. We're really big advocates. Personally and professionally, both Rachel and I were really, really big and supportive in terms of being an inclusive organization, making sure we're creating accessible content for everyone. We're also really trying to educate ourselves and really push the envelope when it comes to creating a program that supports everyone and really encompasses a neurodivergent audience. A sense of belonging is so critical in this day and age, and we really want to make sure that every event marketer, demand gen, revenue leader, HR, sales rep that we work with and that we engage with in our world and community, they really feel welcome and feel like we've tailored events to them based on their needs. So one specific way we've leveraged data to help us achieve that goal is during that event, we asked during the registration a very simple question. We asked people what their learning preferences were. And we wanted them to really signal, the best way that they digest and sort of exchange knowledge is that through auditory, is that through visual, is that through tactile, and obviously we sort of use a multitude of different mediums, but really knowing their primary source of learning and how, again, they digest content the best way possible, that really influenced and helped to guide us on how to create our content framework and our playbook for the event. And we were able to actually, on the back end, when people were able to, sort of search through sessions and look through all the amazing content, they were not able to just sort by topic or by their title or by their industry. They were able to search based on their preferences. So if we knew a session was going to be more visually appealing, more slides, more video and sort of support, or if it was more auditory, like they're not comfortable being on camera with a presenter and they would really prefer to have more of a conversation, like what we're seeing with Twitter Spaces and beyond, we wanted to also accommodate that as well. But when we think about a neurodivergent audience, we also wanted to accommodate things like length of a session. We created like 5-minute quick deep dive sort of mini TED Talks that allowed someone, for example, who identifies with ADHD to be feeling like, again, they could digest and process content and really be part of the action in real time. And it really paid significant dividends. We saw a significant increase in participation and a big boost from that registrant to attendee conversion with all the personalization. We made sure we promoted in event marketing, but also had front and center on the event website and all the supporting materials we prepared those attendees with prior to coming on site. Now, I think that's another great lesson. I would love for Rachel, who is an absolute expert in experience design, to really talk a little bit more about the higher level trends so all of you can really understand new ways to really persona map your events and not just look at people from one direction, but really think about them in sort of a multi-dimensional aspect of they are humans, not just professionals. So Rachel, I'd love for you to maybe share some of your expertise and some of your tips.
Yeah, so building upon what you just talked about, asking attendees for their learning preferences during registration, you can also ask them how they want to attend your event. It's you know, you can't assume that everyone is just going to go to sessions or just going to go network. Some people might just want to go for the networking. Some people might just want to go for sessions. Even within sessions, some people might only be interested in the kinds of hands-on interactive sessions you have versus other people would rather just sit and listen. It's on you to understand that. And I wanted to give a brief plug to an organization called Storycraft Lab, who we've worked with in the past, who have created these really great experience profiles. We actually did a webinar with them back in June with Naomi from that organization and with Megan Henshaw from Google, all about this topic, all about how to personalize your event for your attendee experience, and some of the things you can ask about. So I encourage you to go check out the on-demand version of that after you're done with us here, of course. But again, thinking about, when you're thinking about your full agenda, mapping the different activities you have to those different ways of experiencing your event and actually creating journeys for attendees. If someone has indicated, during registration that they're more interested in networking, give them a list of all the activities that you have versus sessions, and so on and so forth. So, that will help increase that conversion from registrant to attendee if you're making the experience personal for them. One idea I also had around this, because I know this question is often answered with, the data you're collecting from your attendees during registration and then personalizing the event for them. An idea that I had recently, we haven't acted on this yet, so I can't, report on the results, but it's an idea that hopefully someone steals from me out there and let us know how it goes. If you have an event that happens year over year and you're doing targeted marketing to your alumni, actually looking at what they've done in years past and seeing if they've attended sessions on X topic and that topic is going to be at your event this year, you can tailor the marketing in a way of, if you liked this, then you'll like that. And it's really drawing inspiration from, consumer marketing trends, and also recognizing again that your attendees are whole people that exist outside of their job description. They're used to being promoted to in this way. They're used to Netflix, they're used to Amazon. And it's great for you as an event marketer to draw inspiration, from that. And I hope someone does this or has done it, maybe in the chat. If you can comment on that, that would be great.
So a lot of what you're talking about comes down to assessing the most qualified leads and knowing how to speak to needs and how to kind of manage the event in a way that really you get to customize and really it's going to increase the chances of conversion, right? If you can customize, if you could do something that feels unique to people, I think that's really great. So a lot of this is a post-event kind of thing. You get the data and you can analyze it and you can kind of put people in lists or you can nurture them, that kind of thing. But is there any way to kind of prepare your sales team pre-event so they know how to engage and how to kind of do this in real time? Is that possible?
So I love this question. I think this is such a hot topic. And anytime I have the privilege of speaking with other industry peers, this is such a conversation that just expands way beyond the events organization. So I'll share kind of what we've put into practice and some of the sort of lessons and advice I've received over my tenure in my career to really mobilize a sales force around a particular program or portfolio. So the first thing I'd recommend is, and again, this is in context of only post-event. So there should already be an assumption that you're briefing these go-to-market teams, that they're empowered, they're given enablement materials to invite key accounts, customers, and prospects to upcoming programs, events, networking functions, etc. And really what I'm going to focus on is how do we prepare for the post-event experience. My first rule is making sure at least 1 month out from any event with any scope, you have met with your go-to-market leaders, that is pre-sales, that is customer success, that is support, and anyone in between, and you are getting everyone a seat at the table, and you are really creating an align and commitment meeting where everyone is getting on the same page and really understanding all the ways in which we can engage and relationship build and follow up during and after the event. And then from that meeting, you will then convert that into a comprehensive brief. That brief should include everything from the number of emails marketing will be sending, how we're segmenting, what calls to action, what additional sort of content and offerings we're going to provide back to our audiences, whether they were registrants, whether they were full-blown attendees, and really kind of work backwards from there. And then I also like to use sort of advanced communication tactics, whether it's embedding something into a sort of a go-to-market newsletter internally, if you have employee communications, if you have a Slack channel, for example, really giving some teasers and preparing individuals well in advance. And then I always like, as a best practice, 4 business days out from your event, in an ideal scenario, you have everyone from go-to-market join a very comprehensive briefing. You walk through your brief, you distribute that after the actual presentation so they have a follow-up and can really digest everything, and giving them a few days before going in to execute the program and get ready to activate the post-sale experience. And you have, again, all the instructions provided. And in that briefing, you walk them through the timeline, their ask, what do they each need to do? Where will they be able to locate information? For example, are you going to have detailed notes that are going to be attached in your CRM post-event that they can look to, and then customize those follow-up emails that you've given them sort of an outline to run with? So there's so much to really think about there. And making sure that you also talk about the touch points marketing will support and reinforce, so it's everyone rowing in one direction, and really making sure it's a very well thought out, inclusive plan. Now, when we think about day of, don't just think about post-event as, okay, the event's over. I really like to empower the sales force during those briefings with actual advance notice of who's coming, who's RSVP'd, who's planning on joining us, and allowing them information on what sessions have they selected that you should join as well, and just thank them for joining this session. Or meeting them in person and knowing exactly what functions they've RSVP'd to, so you can really have a very intentional relationship sort of catalyst as part of this motion. And that also makes the follow-up a lot less robotic, and versus you've engaged them previously before you sort of move forward. Now, the other thing you want to talk about is you want to review with them the scoring methodology around lead pass. Are you giving point evaluations on the back end with your marketing ops and revenue leads that are different from previous events? Don't assume anything or assume they know. We really have to over communicate. A great tool that we use at Bizzabo is we actually like to use a platform called Loom, and we like to record a lot of sessions that give more in detail descriptions and instructions around certain actions so that people can consume them at the convenience, especially if you have a global sales force, so they can watch and digest and feel truly prepared before going in and again activating post-event. Now, the other thing I'll mention is with the post-event piece, let's talk about some of the earlier things we shared in this webinar. It is critical that you also work with sales to also pass along those warmest leads based on those engagement metrics, and letting sales know when they're going to be expecting that in their inbox with an alert or with a notification in Salesforce, for example, if that's what you use. And we also have a lot of statistics to show when post-event happens. We really need to monitor that activity and have pre-existing meetings. So another best practice I like to extend to all of you to consider is actually having meetings on the calendar during your debriefing moments. But within that, again, 72 hours and 2 weeks, the timelines that Rachel had previously shared, have some checkpoints on the calendar with go-to-market leaders and the customer success organizations, et cetera, to really review what level of activity has been completed by date. So if you need to shift your plan, because again, your goal as an event leader is to create a very comprehensive, organized plan, not perfection. Things change all the time. You need to pivot. And again, if certain content's not resonating, or the on-demand, there's a delay for whatever reason, you really need to make sure you have those backup plans, and you really share that with everyone across those organizations, so everyone understands what plan A, B, and C look like well before going into this. And again, using that month in advance time frame to really plan that out and being very, very strategic. So those are just some of the high level sort of best practices, timelines, and ways in which we operate that gets people. And again, your goal is to really condition your audience and your internal stakeholders so they get very familiar with this mechanism, and it really becomes an autonomous engine where people are expecting that brief, they're expecting that briefing meeting, and it really starts to run like clockwork so you can be more efficient and take on more for the business.
Jen Artura says, I see a Bizzabo sales enablement guide coming from Devin. I'd agree. I think there's a lot of good stuff in there.
I am happy, by the way, to create that one pager after this event and distribute that. And obviously, I'm very active on social, so stay tuned.
A bit more than one page, I would imagine, but good luck with that. I think that sounds awesome. I do want to expand a little bit.
Something?
Go ahead, Rachel.
Yeah. In response to Jen's her crystal ball moment, is we are, for those of you who might be attending Inbound, HubSpot's Inbound conference, we actually are doing a 90-minute workshop on this exact topic. So how to capitalize from your event and ensure go-to-market sales success afterwards. We've got a couple of great folks from our team running a 90-minute workshop on that exact topic. So
sounds great. Absolutely. So make sure you send your questions in. So we have some questions from you if you want to decode any of what Devin was talking about. I want to actually just ask a question to kind of, I guess in a way, humanize what we're talking about here. To me, it sounds a bit like this is kind of like marketing automation, but with humans involved and with a whole team effort. So when you're doing marketing automation, when there's like a website and something like HubSpot or Marketo, you're kind of like saying, okay, if somebody does X, you do Y, right? And then there's a kind of flow. I think what you're suggesting here is with the technology we have in hand now, we can do this, but humans are complex and events are complex. And so to set up this marketing automation, if you will, this kind of human marketing automation, we need to make sure we're connected with all the teams and all the teams understand sort of like how everything can change and the way everything can happen so that you can kind of react on this in real time. Is that what we're talking about here?
I would agree with that, but I would also say, technology is meant to be an enabler. It should not be a controller of how you actually foresee and plan out your post-event experience or your event experience and design overall. There's nothing that's going to beat a handwritten thank you note from someone going to another individual and showing the intention and time and personalization that you put into that. I think when we look at technology, it's really about how do we organize all of this data in a way that can sort of, again, meet real-time needs, accelerate the efficiency of, again, moving very, very fast. Because as we know, and many, many studies have happened around, engaging in relationship building. If we just take that post-event theme that we're on previously, there's studies that show for every day that you let pass after your event, 20% of your attendees or your audience is dropping off, they're disengaging, and they're moving on to something else.
For sure.
So timing is of the essence. So technology really can help, again, automate and provide certain reports as fast as possible versus manual, which, again, I've been in this business for over 18 years at this point. I remember the amount of manual work that events teams would do before technology was really introduced and part of the core MarTech or tech stack of any business. So again, you have to take it with a grain of salt and not feel like you have this pressure to leverage all of these tools, but really make it work for what makes sense for you based on the event, based on the goals, based on the size, based on the expectations, the objectives, and everything you set forward, which again, I'm hoping you pre-exist and sort of pre-populate and share with your leadership team so everyone is aligned from the top down.
So in a perfect world, if somebody takes an action that you may be expecting at a live event and that triggers something, can that have a sort of immediate reaction that is constructive to a sales process, et cetera, just like it would in an email conversation or something like that?
Absolutely. So think about this. If you have a session going live just like this right now, and let's say it was targeted on a very particular product announcement or very important sort of partnership announcement relative to a brand, and you have on a screen, whether it's hybrid or virtual, on a mobile app or on a desktop or a laptop, in front of that attendee, you have a survey question in real time pop up and say, what do you think about that? Or do you leverage this feature? Or do you do something with that? And based on that response, you can immediately translate their answer to one of your sales representatives or account teams, and they can follow up with that customer in real time before the event's even over because you already have their attention. They're live in front of you right now. Capitalize on that and actually follow up and say, I'm not sure if you're aware of this great article in our community, but here's a whole bunch of tips and tricks on leveraging that feature to maximize this. Or again, check this box on this challenge that you might be facing, or I'd love to meet one-on-one with you and initiate a meeting request. And then again, be able to talk more in depth about their feedback, their excitement, their positivity, their constructiveness around the product, whatever that may look like. And that's just one use case, and there's a handful we can come up with. So again, the power of technology and leveraging it to be an enabler, it is unprecedented on the value it can bring to your audience, making them again feel like humans and that you know exactly who they are versus they're just another number and a number on a screen joining a content session, hearing something from a speaker.
Love that. Lots of really actionable stuff there. And thank you for allowing me to kind of think my way through this and kind of dissect it a little bit. Rachel, when I come up to you, we've also talked a little bit about post-event reporting, and I wanted to get your recommendations in kind of sharing dashboards, reports. How do you kind of see this, the best possible solution for post-event reporting?
Yeah, this is a fun question for me to think about because there's so many different data points, right? It's the $1 million question. You get so much data from your in-person events, now even more from your virtual events. What's relevant? What should you actually be including as part of your post-event readout, to the variety of teams that you have to do that for? So I created sort of a menu of post-event data points that you can reference when, putting this together. I am not going to read through this. And yes, we will be providing this after the fact for you to kind of take home to your teams and think about, what you would include in your post-con reporting. And also, if I miss something, let us know in the chat. I'm sure I missed something because, again, there's so much here. But I just wanted to call out a few points in particular and just some unique ways to think about them. So, and I'll just go through each category really quickly. For attendance, when you look at the show rate of your attendees, meaning of those who registered, how many of them actually attended and what that percentage was, that number is an indicator of a couple of things. It's an indicator of how great your pre-event marketing was and how great the marketing to your registrants about your event to make sure they attend was. And if you're not doing a marketing campaign specifically to registrants, you should. This is great for your event marketing team. That's a data point that they will look at and say, okay, our marketing was great. It got people to convert. When you think about content, which is of course where I live and breathe, I added continuing education credits here. First of all, is your content something that could be used for continuing education credits for the industry that you're in?
This webinar is.
Yeah, I know that Skift is a provider of continuing education credits for those who are CMPs. Bizzabo is as well. Think about that for your industry. And then once you've done the work to become a provider, look at how many people actually have opted in to say, yes, I want continuing education credits. If the number isn't as significant as you thought it was, that's good intel. That's good to know. Or if it's off the charts, makes the case for why you're investing in being a provider. Thinking about engagement, I added here uploading a profile picture. If you have some kind of networking opportunity in your platform, or if you have a mobile app for your in-person event, how many people uploaded a profile picture? That's a really good indication of if they're interested in networking and being part of that community on site. That will tell you a lot. For sponsorship, looking at how many, if you have a sponsorship program year after year, making sure you're measuring the retention of those sponsors, how many are coming back? And if you see some that have come back many years, create a focus group, learn more from those people, learn more about what they want, and learn more about how you can translate what they like about your program to new sponsors. And that can inform your prospectus. And then around business impact, obviously, we've been talking about this all hour. So, but I did want to point out, obviously, that pipeline generated and those marketing qualified leads and going from marketing qualified to sales accepted leads are really good data points to make sure that you're including in that post-con reporting.
Can I just also maybe shout out to the audience and say, when you see this comprehensive list, and I think these data points are changing all the time, are there any data points that we didn't cover here that you feel like we should call out to this audience and that you'd even recommend us to consider? So I'd love for everyone in that chat to say any unique kind of data points that you're currently looking at, measuring, or even experimenting with that you might be able to inspire another event leader on this call today.
Absolutely. We can all learn from each other.
Yeah, Rachel, I wanted to actually ask you, are any of these new? I mean, because we're in this kind of new age of event planning. Which of these has developed a lot over the last couple of years? Do you have any insight into that?
Yeah, I think under engagement, especially around, the time spent on platform, emoji reactions, there's actually a lot that people can take from a kind of behavioral insights around how people are reacting to your content, especially around emoji reactions. That's something that we've actually started looking at a lot around engagement data.
Yeah, I mean, think
That's
about
funny,
those emojis. Think about for those emojis,
Yeah.
you can actually correlate why someone selects a heart over laughter, over a thumbs up based on the keyword or whatnot that you're using. You can actually share that back with your marketers and your teams, and that can influence content, that can influence visual layouts and UX of future website. I mean, there's so many ways that you can transfer that information back just by a simple use of an icon.
Mm-hmm.
Love it. Yeah, I was just going to say, I think, a lot of people dismiss emojis. They're not business-like. They don't really do anything. But I think this is one of those situations where emojis can actually uncode a whole lot of emotions and a whole lot of activity that's really important when you're looking at this, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
So Devin, wanted to come to you. I know you have some real life examples of telling stories with data, and that's just kind of like one of my favorite things. Data can be very abstract, particularly kind of like big data reports. But when you're able to see something in that data, can you share the example, of telling a story with data?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? I'm going to channel my inner Brene Brown right now, and I'm going to be vulnerable, and I'm going to share a very true and transparent story that I witnessed a few years ago. So I want to sort of set the scene. I had the privilege of working with a pretty fantastic brand and team, and we were executing a flagship event. It was in person. So many of us now, again, selecting in person moving forward in this year and beyond, can maybe hopefully relate to this. So the conference happened. There was roughly about 150 content sessions that we had executed. And obviously the event ended, and then we moved and transitioned into the debrief mode of the sort of planning cycle. So we met with various stakeholders. We compiled all of the data, which was extensive, and especially had a very keen analysis on the content from presenter engagement to the content really absorbing and hitting and what really resonated, what topics were most interesting to people. And then obviously the ultimate, which sessions had the most attendance and sort of the volume and that sort of age-old game. So my team and I, we put together sort of a laundry list and sort of compiled all of the sessions and mapped them to, the attendance figures. And we looked at the top 20 most attended sessions, and we looked at the top 20 least attended sessions. And one interesting difference that year that we made, and we sort of have adopted this moving forward, is we brought some external sort of experts within our own organization, like data scientists and marketing ops leaders, into the room for the conversation, and did not just withhold that to the events team itself. And we really looked at that analysis, and we tried to really pull out some insights. And I will tell you, ultimately, I would have defaulted by looking at those numbers and saying, we are going to sunset those sessions that had lower than X number of people in a room, or we need to re-engage those speakers and understand maybe they need some coaching, or the topic or the title wasn't written in a way that was super compelling versus the other options available to the audience. And what was interesting is the individuals who are not event trained in that room raised their hand and said, have we ever really done an analysis on the attendees in that room? And it was almost like a light bulb went off. And we actually looked at a session that only had 15 attendees. And the irony of that situation was those 15 attendees were some of our biggest and largest accounts for the business. And what that showed to us and signaled was, again, don't assume a session because it has less attendance is less effective. That room, that content could have contributed to millions of dollars in business simply because we gave a session that connected it back to our product and was an opportunity for a meeting or kind of a very organic follow-up post talk. And so we really took a lot from that lesson, and sort of, again, many of us as a team really realized it's so important. My number one tip, I actually should say, is bring people into that room post-event who are not core team members. Have different individuals look at that data and really analyze it together. First of all, it's more inclusive. Number two is people are going to have a different lens if they look at that data to extract insights. And those insights are going to unlock unbelievable potential moving forward to level up your event programs. Now, the other thing I will mention tied to this story is when you think about those sessions and sort of content in general, data can be processed and interpreted subjectively. So you really need to make sure that you're documenting those insights and you're distributing those as sort of post-event notes for everyone in the business to read around. And as event experience leaders, as we're really trying to convert from event managers, event organizers into the sort of concept of event experience leaders. And part of that is really extending the muscle of constantly looking at data to strengthen that skill set. If you're only looking at data ever so often, I would really employ you to connect with other members, even establish a mentor within your business who can really help you look at data from a different perspective. It is going to be a game changer and a differentiator for you as a value add for the contributions you make to your business.
Great stuff. Just want to recognize a few comments that are coming through in the chat. There's a lot of interesting chat, particularly in this section. Douglas Piper says that LinkedIn finally added laughing emoji as a reaction, a sign of the times in business. I think that's really interesting.
Absolutely.
Brittany Liddell says this exact thing that you were mentioning, Devin, happened at an event in June. We had a huge donor come out of a small and low attended info session. And I think it's really saying, just because it's low attendance doesn't mean it's a bad session. I think it's really important to kind of differentiate those and kind of understand the differences. A lot more interesting comments. Jen Artura, great list, Rachel. To Devin's question, I think engaging with attendees prior to the event with questions that really unveil what I as an attendee need is the gold mine. I think that's a really good tip there. We're all very demanding, selective, and we make decisions based on our own needs. As an attendee, I want customized experience. And that's really what we're talking about here, right? How to make that customized experience. I also wanted to point out Cynthia Smith had one to add to the list. I don't know if it's on the list. She says, I don't know if this is on the list, but we're tracking returning to watch online sessions. So people that are in person and then they return online to watch content. This is a scientific association audience. So I think that's an excellent suggestion there. I don't know if that's new or not, or maybe a kind of combination of a couple of your points.
Yeah, I had on-demand attendees on there, but on-demand session consumption that's a huge one. And especially if they were an in-person attendee, seeing if they came back is definitely a really interesting data point for sure.
Can I also add around on-demand consumption? I think another interesting experiment to actually put out there for many of you to consider is I've seen recently some brands actually have an expiration date for their on-demand. So instead of just having it be universal and everlasting, actually using that as a mechanism to follow up with their audiences maybe a month after the event concluded. And it's another way for them to have a touch point and re-engage and say, this content is about to be sunsetted after X date. So don't forget to go back, share this with other members of your team who maybe they forgot to do so because they were busy or they had other, again, sort of commitments right after the program concluded. So just really think about all the creative ways that you can kind of leverage these data points and use that to actually resurrect new trends tied to your community and your audience, because again, no one's going to tell you better than themselves.
Yeah. I was actually combining two of the suggestions. I think Lauren had a comment on Cynthia's point, and she said it'd be interesting to track how many in-person attendees watched on-demand content after the fact to see how impactful that piece was as part of an all-access pass. So really kind of like making important business decisions, based on your data, which I think is huge, right? It's not just personalization, which is of course really important, but making real business decisions of, how do we make that a better event next year? I wanted to go back to a question that was asked at the start. Rachel, you sound like you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I was going to say, I do think we've got our Ask the Speaker channels blowing up. So I think we should shift to some of those attendee questions if that's what you were about to do.
Well, there was a question early on from somebody from Brazil, and he asked a pretty interesting question, which essentially was, it's Philippe Tossi, and he asked, how is the best way we can ensure an in-person event to make use of those, uh, to really create a data-driven experience in in-person events? And I know you guys have some pretty interesting technology to do that, but I'd like to hear kind of the overall picture that you might be able to share here.
Yeah, Devin, I'll let you take this one.
Sure. Yeah. So sorry. Can you just repeat that question real quick?
So the question is really, we're talking about mainly the online experience, collecting data from online experience. How do we do the same thing for in-person events? Can we pick up data points and then do the same kind of things?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think, about 5 to even 10 years ago, I think a big focus for in-person was we were hearing kind of this experimentation around long-range scanning. So many people really understanding how to track where people were going, what the volume of people were in certain locations tied to sort of maybe a major convention center, like where did they actually spend their time, how long did they spend their time, et cetera. And I do feel that technology is getting incredibly sophisticated, where as we're again re-embarking and investing on in-person, we're seeing organizations who really provide a lot of on-site services. And again, not to plug Bizzabo, but I'll just say, we're really sort of pioneering a new wearables opportunity. So allowing people to come on site and have wearable trackers that really allow us to understand the metrics that we used to get for virtual in terms of how long did they stand in a certain location of a trade show floor? How long did they engage with someone? How can they easily exchange contact information? There's so many untapped benefits that we're going to be seeing. But I really also would employ you that a lot of in-person individuals, they can physically only go to so much content in so many places. So as Cynthia and others talked about, it's really critical that you're also virtualizing a lot of your content and making sure that that's available post-event and not just be so focused on the on-site. I think it's setting expectations and understanding how your audience wants to maneuver and how much they're willing to consume and when they want to consume it. We should not alienate some of the best practices and trends that came out of the virtual boom of meeting people where they are, giving them access 24/7, and really continuing those trends. Again, remember, their personal and their professional lives, they're more merged together than ever. We want to really take a lot of those trends that we see in the consumer world, like the Netflix, the e-commerce, and really bring that forward and figure out with an in-person audience how you can capture those data points more often than not, and really even do it in real time, leveraging great technology and mobile applications that are really becoming more innovative than ever before.
Love it. I think Alan Alroy, your CMO, he was on the podcast, on the Event Manager podcast, and we talked about that and the Click acquisition and bringing that technology into Bizzabo and how that's going to work out. So I'm excited to see how that happens and how that works out. Interesting comment here from Cynthia Smith. Our members say heat mapping is Big Brother and they don't want it. And I think it's interesting in that sense of just because you can doesn't mean you should. So Absolutely. It's great to have the technology that enables us to do all these things, but then we have to kind of, use what works and experiment, right? Kind of prototype, experiment, keep going.
And by the way, how much are your attendees owed that transparency? So I'm a big believer in making sure that if you're building an honest, trustworthy relationship with your community, they are owed how you're leveraging that data, what data you're collecting, and also providing them the value proposition of why they want that to exist and how you're going to make the event better for them and meet their goals and objectives as a result of getting access to that information.
Great stuff. So I want to jump to a few audience questions. We still have a little bit of time. Question for you. Would you recommend a survey prior to an event during the registration process to ask people what they want to get out of the event? So really asking people for their goals when they're coming to an event.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's a great idea. And from a content perspective, you can even include them if you run a call for speakers, or even before you run a call for speakers, asking them what those topics are that they care about. I think a great example of that would be if you have a call for speakers, after it's over, building in time in your review process where you actually let your community vote on submissions. And then use that data to inform the sessions that you select for your event. I think it's a really inclusive way to make sure that the event is what they want and that the content is relevant for them.
And again, consolidate that with your registration form. You don't have to send out a separate survey and add another touch point, unless that's what they want and what you think is the best way to collect the most responses, etc. But that's why we've really kind of consolidated into, on our registration, we're capturing demographic, we're capturing contact information, which is important, but we even call out in that section, like, we want to learn more about who you are as a human and not just professionally what you represent and what you stand for. And that has, again, really warranted great success for us. And people are willing to spend an extra 30 seconds to a minute on a registration form to give us that intel, because they know that we're going to use that information and they're going to see that reflected when they show up on site. The one piece of advice I would give everyone on this call is, do not ask something that you cannot back up and that you cannot incorporate into your event, because that will actually have a backlash and could diminish the NPS.
Yes, for sure.
Ahead,
I want to add one other thing that I love about Brittany's question is that if you make that survey not anonymous and let people to actually raise their hands and identify themselves, those are your evangelists, those are your ambassadors, those are the people who really will become key players in the community that you're trying to build, and you're giving them a way to identify themselves for you. Anyone who cares so much about your event that they're willing to answer a survey before you even launch registration, you need to know who those people are.
Great advice. Michelle Heffernan has a question. Does anybody have a format copy they use to request topics to discuss? I think if the Bizzabo team has any suggestions or kind of pre-populated questions there, I'm sure that would be really useful. Let me challenge your advice there, Devin, and I'm just offering another option. So I feel that sometimes if you ask this at a registration point, it could be quite early before an event. And sometimes it's hard to, maybe you don't know who the speakers are, or you haven't defined all the content, or sometimes it might be a little bit tricky. Like the person just wants to register. They don't want to worry too much about, selecting the sessions at that point. Would it also be, a good option to do it, I don't know, like as a text message as people walk into the convention, or as they're logging in, if it's an online event, just because it's more kind of top of mind as they're doing that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great option. And again, it goes back to, you have to really understand where in the journey you need to insert that opportunity or that inquiry. Another thing that I would talk about is when someone registers, and again, I'm guilty of this, so I'm admitting this wholeheartedly. Like, hi, my name is Devin, and I've done this activity. I have alienated registrants before they become attendees. I have not nurtured them after they register effectively. And this is another great way to do that as a touch point. So as we think about journeys and we think about sort of, again, continuously keeping someone warm and engaged and really involved in what's going on and really having a good awareness, you could even say X weeks from the event, you are always going to administer this survey, and it's going to be a final touch point. Once they've already committed by completing the core registration, they're now more invested. So your likelihood of a response or some sort of reply is going to probably increase percentage-wise, and that could also boast really well. But I think any one of these options is viable. It's just really experimenting and know what your audience expects and wants. It's that simple.
Great stuff. So moving on to another question from the audience. Do you see one event needing to serve all the revenue metrics that you've discussed, or is this a portfolio approach? What do you see kind of more frequently?
Rachel, I'm happy to take this. If you want to take it as well, it is up to you.
You can take it, because I know it was something that you were thinking about when we were preparing for this session. I do want to just shout out to the person who asked the question, Allison Crooker, because she is one of my favorite people and just gave a great session at SEMA. So I just had to say that.
Absolutely. Oh, hi, Allison. I'm so thankful that you joined us today. This is fantastic. So the question being, do we really need to put all of our eggs in one basket and create such a momentum around one single event to hopefully be able to impact all of those goals? My short answer is no. And what I would even say is we have to pay attention to trends that we're seeing in market right now. Many brands, and especially this is also just behavior from companies, not everyone is going to be receiving approvals to travel to a major destination and participate in a single flagship event for thousands of dollars. A lot of brands are choosing to migrate, not maybe away from, they're not consolidating and they're not sunsetting a flagship, but they're really choosing more micro events in more regionalized territories and meeting their audiences and their customers and prospects where they are in their backyard. So as a result of that, you really have a lot of flexibility to add more volume and really focus different objectives and goals and data points around those different pieces. I'm a big supporter of a very kind of multi-beneficial portfolio, that certain events focus on key data points and other events do, another sort of goal or objective. But there's a lot of crossover that can happen. Like every event can have some sort of bottom of the line, again, pipeline generating activity, but maybe one event's more focused on community building, another event's more focused on market feedback, another event's more focused on relationship or networking amongst consumers because you're trying to create a more robust user group. Like there's so many different ways to leverage this, but I do think that, again, having a different format and variety of events, it also is a great piece of data in itself of what your audience really reacts to. Which events do they prefer to attend, which formats and styles, and having more in your portfolio gives you, again, a more accelerated kind of debrief on exactly where you should double down moving forward, how you can secure more investments from your, again, executives, and really show and prove the ROI that was the foundation of this webinar.
Love it. What a great place to wrap up. Devin, Rachel, thank you so much for your time and your insight. I think we mapped a really interesting overview of event data and what to do with it. I hope everybody attending enjoys. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your comments. It's been really great. The session will be available on demand in about 24 hours. So even if you have any colleagues that might want to register, they can still register and then watch it later. Just want to say thank you to everybody on behalf of Skift Meetings and Bizzabo. Really appreciate you being with us today. And we hope to see you again soon at one of our webinars, events, or anywhere else. Take care, everybody, wherever you are.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Thank you so much.